There is one question that you need to answer. It's the most important question for you to answer individually. And your answer to that question is going to determine how motivated you are, how successful you are, how bold you are in your future. This is also the same question that humanity as a whole needs to answer. And we live in a media world. There's tons of media. If it bleeds, it leads. Because human beings have an irrational fear of loss and failure, the media answers this question for the whole of society in the exact opposite way that you want to answer it for yourself. If you want to have a better future, I'm about to go into this question and explain all the science as to why you need to answer this question in a powerful way if you want a big future, or you're going to give it up. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I'm the author of Be Your Future Self Now. Down below, if you click the link and go to futureself.com, you can get free additional resources on this book. Please like this video. Please subscribe so that more people can see this content. All right, I'm going to go into this question. So the most fundamental question you can ask yourself is your past bigger than your future? In other words, are you going to outdo your past self? Are you going to keep courageously, boldly trying new things? Or are the biggest things you've ever done behind you? That may not seem like a profound question, but it actually is. Are you willing to commit and try and attempt things beyond anything you've ever done in the past? This is especially true of people who are successful, people who have actually achieved things in the past. It can be very easy to actually believe that the best things are behind you. And actually, this is the message that a lot of people are talking about in society today. There's a book I heavily recommend everyone read right now in the world. Right now, we're about halfway through 2022. And obviously, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty in the world. And the book I recommend everyone read is called The Rational Optimist. What this book projects and explains, and it does a very thorough job, is it explains that throughout human history, all of evolution has been nothing but progress. Yes, with progress, there comes up and downs. It's not a straight line. There's peaks and valleys. That's another brilliant book that I highly recommend read. And it's what happens in the valleys that ultimately determines the bigger and bigger peaks. What Matt Ridley says in that book, and he breaks it down by segments of human history, is that nothing but progress has happened and that the rate of progress goes exponential. And so over the last 150 years, we've actually had far more innovation and far more improvement throughout human lifestyle, human knowledge, human evolution than over the last, call it maybe 100,000 years. And so our progress is accelerating like crazy. And over the last 30 to 50 years, the progress has been so ridiculous. Have there been downturns? Have there been corrections? Have there been ups and downs along the way? Of course. But if you actually zoom back and look at the big picture, it's almost been nothing but a straight up growth curve. And so this is where people get irrational. And this is where that important question comes in. When there's some form of correction, or even if you're trying something on an individual level and you experience some form of failure, or you feel like you're going backwards a little bit, then you ask yourself, is the best behind me? Is the future going to be different? And moving forward, there's no more progress. Actually, from here forward, it's going down. That's actually the message that he talks about in The Rational Optimist, that at every stage along the way, whether it was 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, the doomsdayers would say the same thing when there was a little bit of friction on the pathway up. They would say this: yes, if we look back in history, there's almost nothing but progress, innovation, and evolution. However, this is a different time, and moving forward, it's all downhill from here. The golden era is behind us. We're not going to make progress. The best is behind us. The past is the best. We cannot outdo our former selves. This is different, and it's all downhill from there. That is the doomsday message, and it's not a new message. It's the message that has been given throughout human history. If you study basically the British Empire, I was actually just barely in London. The kings of that time, back in like the 1000, 2000 AD, they were saying the exact same thing. They thought that humanity had gone as far as it could possibly go, and it's all downhill from there. And there's a reason why people buy into this message. Dr. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize-winning economist / psychologist, breaks this down in Thinking Fast and Slow. The biggest cognitive bias we have is loss aversion. We freak out at the idea of loss. We fear loss. And when we experience even a little bit of loss, we freak out. There's actually a really hilarious and interesting study on this subject. Basically, what researchers did is they took a group of monkeys and they split them in half. For group one, they gave that group, all the monkeys, a single banana. And because the monkeys had gotten a banana, they were obviously very happy. Well, with group two, what they did was they gave the monkeys 2 bananas. And then after a quick second, they took one of the bananas away. And those monkeys were so angry, so upset, so frustrated that they were not even happy with the 1 banana. Obviously, if you pull it back and look, both monkeys went from 0 to 1 banana. But because the second group of monkeys felt like they'd gone backwards a little bit, they irrationally freaked out and they exaggerated that loss. And then they were not even happy with nor appreciated the progress that they've made. As human beings, we fail to appreciate when things are not going wrong. We actually fail to appreciate the progress that's gone on, and we adapt so quickly. And then once we adapt very quickly to gains, we want the next thing. We want the next thing and the next thing. It's called the hedonic treadmill. And so as human beings, it's really important to realize how our brain works. We don't appreciate when things aren't going wrong. We don't appreciate the goodness of our lives. We don't appreciate how brilliant they are. We don't actually see that things right now in the world are better than they've ever been for the whole of humanity. And I would say for the average human being. Just look at your own life and compare your life to where it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. For most people listening to this, their life is exponentially better. They're exponentially more knowledgeable, more wealthy. But if you look at humanity as a whole over the last 5 or 10 years, nothing but up in terms of innovation, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of knowledge. Does that not mean that there are challenges? Of course. Opioid epidemics, addiction. I mean, there's always challenges that come with growth. And then when things start to go down a little bit, when you actually experience a failure, I actually love the quote from Seth Godin. He said, if I fail more than you, I win. A lot of people, when they experience any form of failure, they then irrationally inflate loss. They freak out and then they bail on their dreams. This is why you have to ask yourself on an individual level, because right now on a collective level, we know what the main message is and what it's always been. The main message is, yes, we've made massive progress in the past. You can't refute that. If you look back at the past, we've experienced nothing but growth through all of human history and evolution. And that growth curve is exponential. You can't refute that. Just look at life, look at history, look at the facts. Look at where the average life expectancy is in third world countries. It's doubling, tripling from what it was 30 to 50 years ago. Everything is getting better. But when there's a little bit of friction, we know what the message is. The best is behind us. We can't continue this growth curve. The future is different. This time is different. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And even Warren Buffett talks about this irrational fear that people have. People buy when they should be selling, because when things are going really good, people get overconfident. They get over greedy. Whereas when things go backwards just a little, when we go into a little bit of a dip, people then irrationally sell when they should be buying, because they buy into the mainstream message, because they have this frustration or fear or over exaggeration of loss. They freak out and they don't recognize that if you look on a bigger scale, you're like up 10 times from where you were 5 to 10 years ago. You've gone so much as an individual. Now you're down a little bit and you're freaking out and you're throwing in the towel on your future. So I love the Rational Optimist. I recommend it. I also recommend the books Peaks and Valleys. And the reason I love this book is because it says that when you're in a little bit of a valley, or when you're in a little bit of a challenge, individually or collectively, that it's what you learn from and what you do in that valley that determines the quality and the size of your next peaks. I think looking at humanity as a whole, we always evolve. Necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes corrections or a little bit of challenge, or even quote unquote failure in the moment, leads to extreme learning and ultimately growth. You can turn any quote unquote trauma into growth. Post-traumatic growth is a big idea in psychology these days. And it's all about taking some form of challenge, trauma, or pain, or rough experience, and ultimately learning from it, having new meaning, and ultimately expanding your sense of purpose because of it. You learn to look at the past from a positive lens. You are the one who looks at the past and determines what it means. You're the one who creates a story. But people who have post-traumatic growth learn to take any experience, especially negative experiences, and spin them to a gain. I love the quote from Gordon Livingston. He wrote a book called Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart. And he was a grief psychiatrist. And one of the things he said is that the narratives of our past are not fixed structures, but they're under constant revision. We're always revising the meaning of our past based on where we're at in the present. And so you have power to create post-traumatic growth from anything. Any situation that happened can happen for you rather than to you if you take control of your narrative, and if you actually are a learner. If you take the situation and you say, how can I use this to make me better? How can I use this to get smarter? If you're constantly learning, then you can take your experiences and use them for massive growth. And so back to the core question that I asked you from the beginning, and I think this is a super important question for you to answer. Are you going to commit to something bigger than you've ever done before, or is your best work behind you? Is your former self the best version there is? This is why I actually love working with Dan Sullivan. Dan Sullivan and I actually wrote a book called The Gap and the Gain. We also wrote a book called Who Not How. We're now writing our third book together called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And Dan is a beautiful example to me because he's almost 80 years old. But the last 5 years of his life have been the most prolific, the most productive. He actually believes he's going to live to be 156 years old. And he has this quote that I love, and it fits with all the research in psychology. But his quote is that the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. You've got to always be outdoing your former self. You've got to always be doing things that your former self had never done before. You've got to be trying things, committing to things that are above your skill level. Dan actually has a cycle. He calls it the 4C cycle. And I can back this up as a psychologist because I think there's a lot of research on this. He says, in order to get moving in your life, you've got to commit to something above and beyond your current level of capability and confidence. We all have a current level of capability and confidence. Our capability and confidence are based on what we've accomplished in the past. But in order to go bigger, you've got to commit to something way above and beyond anything you've ever done before. You've got to attempt something bigger or better. If you're an artist, that means actually trying to create maybe a better album than you've ever done before. If I'm an author, it means like trying something I've never done. I remember when I was a blogger and I was writing on medium.com, and for over 3 years, I was the #1 blogger on that website. My blogs had been read almost 100 million times just on that website alone, way over 100 million collectively on all the websites my stuff's been blogged on. But I remember always trying to outdo my former self. Like I would go and look for the biggest, most powerful blog posts, and I would try to do things I've never done before. Even one of my mentors, Richard Paul Evans, who's written like 40 New York Times bestsellers, he says that every time he writes a book, he's always trying to do something he's never done before. He's always trying to make it his best possible book. And so you've got to be committing above and beyond anything you've ever done before. And the only reason you would do that as a person is if you actually believe in your future self, if you actually believe that you can have a bigger future than your past. And this is, again, why I love working with Dan, is because this guy's he's almost in his 80s, and he believes that the next 20 to 30 years of his life are going to be the most prolific and productive. And I actually believe so as well, simply because I've been with him for the last 5 years, and I can say with conviction, his work is getting more innovative. He's creating more and better work than he ever has. He actually publishes 4 books a year of his own. Plus, he's got like dozens of brilliant collaborations, which he calls free zone frontiers, which are just utterly amazing. He is producing at a very high level, and he's evidence to me that aging is just an idea. A lot of people, when they get into their 50s or 60s, they slow down because they're expecting that they're on a downturn. And so they create that for themselves. They believe that their best work is behind them. And so mentally they check out, mentally they slow down, and that's what creates the slowing down for them. But if you're always creating a bigger future, if you're always doing things you've never done before, if you're always committing to a higher level, what is this next step in Dan's 4C cycle? After you commit 100% to something, that leads to the next step, which is courage. And courage is the willingness to try something that might not work. This is not true of most people. Most people, they will not commit to something, or they will not try something unless they have a guaranteed security of reward. They will not try something. This is why entrepreneurs are different, is because entrepreneurs have to commit and have to courageously try something without guarantee of reward. And so if you're willing to commit 100% and then courageously pursue and then fail until you succeed, as Seth Godin said, if I fail more than you, I win. And when you experience some form of failure or loss, you transform it into post-traumatic growth. You're always taking slight dips or valleys and using them to create far deeper learning, far deeper wisdom. And so this is the question I ask of you. Are you going to commit to things bigger than you've ever done before? Or is your best behind you? And do you actually buy into the narrative that as a whole, as a species, as a world, that the best is behind us? I don't believe in that. That is a doom and gloom message. That is a fear message, a fearmonger message. It's also, if it bleeds, it leads. And it really does capture most people, because back to Kahneman's research, one of the core cognitive biases we all have is fear of loss and an overinflation in the downsides of any form of going backwards a little bit, back to those monkeys. We overinflate and we freak out at the smallest downtick of correction. And that's how growth is. Growth is not a straight line. It's up and down. But if you learn from those valleys, if you're adaptive, if you evolve, if you learn, you can always get better. I have to share this final thought. This comes from Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. He talks about the importance of whatever view you hold of the future. Now, there's a lot of research. I've broken this down throughout many videos on this channel. The research is showing that whatever view you hold of the future, that's the thing that's the most core driver of your life in the present. We're all committed to a future. Most people, out of fear, limit their view of the future to a narrow range. Basically, they're committed to like daily goals of getting through the workday, paying the bills. Most people's future is so small, they're not committing to a 10x, 100x bigger future and actually going through the deliberate practice of actually getting better and creating a bigger future. But one of the things that Peter Thiel talks about in 0 to 1 is he breaks down 4 views of the future. Basically, you've got definite optimism, which is the most powerful, which is where you have a definitely optimistic future. You believe the future will be better, but you're definite about that future. You actually mentally create, as Stephen Covey would say, mental creation precedes physical creation. You actually define what that future is, and then you work to create it. That's what creativity is. That's what, for example, led people to go to the moon, is they had a definite optimism. They had a definite goal. And interestingly, definite optimism is basically the same thing in psychology as hope. Hope is a definite optimism. It's not just a broad general, I think things are going to be better. Hope is very definite. Here's my specific goal. Here's what I'm going for. I'm going to commit to the goal, but be very flexible in finding a pathway to getting there. And I believe I've got agency that I can choose. I believe that regardless of the situation, I can change my life. There is a way. I will find the way. I will create the way. That is hope. That's what Viktor Frankl had during World War II, when he was a Jewish person in the Nazi concentration camps. He had a future that was big enough to sustain him. He even quoted Nietzsche that he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. You have to have a specific goal. Even Frankl said, what man needs is not a tensionless state, but the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal. He also said that the prisoner who lost faith in their future was doomed. The sudden loss of hope in the future led to the decay spiritually and the decay of the mind and the body. And so you need a future that sustains you. You need a future that's bigger than anything you've ever done. And so back to Peter Thiel, you've got definite optimism, which is a future that's better, that is definite, that you are going to create. You have an indefinite optimism, which is not as powerful. You believe the future's going to be better, but you have no idea what that's going to look like. That leads to basically an overconfidence, a confusion about what to do. You have to be definite. You have to choose, because the goal creates the process. If you just think things are going to be better, but you don't actually know what that looks like, then that leads to confusion about what to do. Then you have definite pessimism. And that's the belief that basically the future will be worse and this is what it's going to look like. And this is where the doomsdayers are, is that they paint a definitely pessimistic view of the future, and they say that this is what it's going to look like. And then there's indefinite pessimism, which is basically the future's going to be worse, but we have no idea what it's going to look like. The only one of those perspectives of the future that leads to proactive, meaningful, powerful behavior is definite optimism. One of the reasons is a concept that Aristotle called final cause. Final cause is the idea that everything we as human beings do is driven by our core goal as a human being. Final cause is our core goal. It's based on a concept called teleology, which basically explains that everything human beings do is for an end. Even you watching this video is for an end. Maybe you just want to know what I'm going to say. Maybe you want to learn. Maybe you're just distracting yourself, but there was a reason you clicked on this video. Every human action is driven by a reason, even if that reason is unconscious. Me getting up and going to the bathroom is driven by the desire to go to the bathroom. And so every human action is driven by a goal. It's the goal or the end that's the cause of the behavior. And so once you're definitely optimistic about the future, once you actually define the future and ultimately use your agency to make choices about what that future would be, for example, we're going to go to the moon in 10 years, whatever it is, you then can go about transforming yourself and learning, deliberately practicing. A lot of research on deliberate practice in psychology. Deliberate practice is the idea that you can actually develop and cultivate expertise in something. But the research also shows in order to be deliberate and to actually practice, and by the way, deliberate practice is the exact opposite of habits. In fact, deliberate practice is meant to counter our human desire, our human natural way of building habits. We build habits naturally, for better or for worse. Deliberate practice is to counter those and to keep us deliberate, to keep us intentional towards working towards harder and harder goals. In order to engage in deliberate practice, you actually have to be intentional. You have to have a clear view of your future self. Researchers show this. Without a view of your future self, a specific, definite view of your future self, you can't engage in deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is very specific. It's about developing a specific skill towards a specific aim. You can't get brilliant and better at what you do on accident. You can't write a book on accident. You can't build a house on accident. You have to have a specific blueprint for the future. Mental creation precedes physical creation. So what is your view of the future? Are you definitely optimistic? Are you indefinitely optimistic? Are you definitely pessimistic? Are you indefinitely pessimistic? We know, and this goes straight back to the rational optimist, that the doomsdayers are always going to say, yes, the past is brilliant. Yes, human beings have done so much. Yes, we're on an exponential growth curve, but now it's different. Now it's broken. The best is behind us. And I ask you, what's your answer to that question on an individual level? Are you going to commit to something bigger than you've ever done? Are you going to be courageous? Are you going to go through the learning process of deliberate practice and develop new skills and abilities? Are you going to invest in your future self? Your level of investment in your future self, however much you're investing right now, is a clear indicator of how much you actually believe in your future. This is why people sell when they should be buying, is because they've stopped believing in the future. They believe the future is going to be bleak, and so they're getting out of the market. It's irrational. It's not how people become millionaires. More millionaires were made during the Great Depression because they took advantage of an opportunity, and they took advantage of the fact that the biggest cognitive bias people have is that monkey mind, where if there's any form of loss, they exaggerate it, they jump ship, they stop believing in the future, and they buy into the doomsdayers. I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. Also go to futureself.com and get some of the amazing resources on the future self science. Have a great day.